a hodgepodge of top secret, highly secure locations across South Texas. This is the play-in edition of the Spurs Insider, the podcast in which the losers always have to go home and play the lottery. I am your host, Mike Finger, joined as always by Express News sports editor Nick Talbot, beat writer Tom Orsborn, and fellow Spurs beat writer, the polarizing Jeff McDonald. And I just asked the room, is everybody excited for postseason NBA fever?
Yay.
It's all come down to this.
You just took my lead from my advance. You just stole it. That was going to be my opening sentence. It's all come down to this.
And what exactly is it coming down to when the San Antonio Spurs, the local Cagers, face off with their vaunted, historic postseason nemesis, the Grizzlies of Memphis?
You know what? You make that joke, but they've probably played the Grizzlies more in the postseason in the last 10 to 12 years than they've played anybody else. We've made a lot of.
I'm not joking.
Back in the travel days, we made a lot of playoff trips to Memphis. A lot of them.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, speaking of that, I was just wondering if you guys remember this. I'm looking at the Grizzlies game notes, and they say this date in Grizzlies history, May 19th, 2013. The fifth-seeded Grizzlies made their first appearance in the Western Conference Finals, falling 103-85 to the number 2-seeded San Antonio Spurs. Quincy Pondexter led Memphis with 17 points off the bench.
Yeah.
Our old friend Quincy. I don't remember that.
He was Quincy was I don't remember that specific game, but
But he was
when he signed with the Spurs, what I knew of Quincy was that he'd actually done okay against them in games that were significant. So that's not surprising to me. He didn't end up playing much with the Spurs.
What was the final score of that game, Tom?
103-85.
So Quincy Pondexter made a lot of hay in the garbage time portion of that game, is what it sounds like to me.
There you go.
I tell you what, I did not enter this podcast room thinking we were going to talk about Quincy Pondexter today. That's what the kind of curveballs you get on the Spurs Insider podcast. You got to stay on your toes.
You're correct in that there is a playoff history. We've talked before.
Long history.
The polarizing Jeff McDonald and I were having a conversation not too long ago about other NBA arenas that we've been to the most, that I've been to the most. And Memphis is up there just because I tend to travel a lot during the playoffs, and the Spurs play the Grizzlies in the playoffs a lot. And so I guess the other dynamic here, not just the fact that these two franchises have played a lot of games against each other, but this year, this series has been weird in that long ago on opening night, the Spurs won at the Grindhouse in Memphis. And then there was a back-to-back in San Antonio where the Spurs basically didn't even show up. I think they were out of it both nights really early. A combined, how many points did they lose by?
48.
A lot. So is there really a home court advantage here?
I don't know. Probably not. I don't know. I'll be honest. I haven't investigated like how many fans Memphis is going to allow into the arena for this one. Knowing what I know about Memphis and Tennessee, I bet they're really, really stringent about COVID protocols. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. I bet Beale Street is just a COVID haven right now. But yeah, I don't know what kind of fans are going to be in there. So if the fan situation is what it has been, there might not be much of a home court advantage. You're correct.
The Spurs certainly have been better away from home than on the road, or away from home than at home this year. So I don't know. It seems like that's not that big of a deal for them to have to go on the road for this. But the big deal that they will have to deal with is Jaren Jackson is available for the Grizzlies. I'm not sure the Spurs have faced this year. You've got the always ever-present dynamo Ja Morant. Well, they will be repeatedly asking on defense, where is Ja? And just a team that does not look like an ideal matchup for the Spurs to be playing in this one game. To review for the viewers, and I realize you're not viewers, you're listeners, but the winner of this game goes on to play the loser of the Warriors and the Lakers. The loser goes home and enters the NBA draft lottery. But speak of this matchup situation for the Spurs against the Grizzlies, Jeff or Tom or Nick or whoever.
Well, it's no longer the grit and grind Grizzlies that we're so familiar with, of course, from playoff days of yore with Randolph and Tony Allen. They lead the league in fast break points. As you mentioned, Mr. Morant had a field day against the Spurs in the opener. So it's a different type of club. It's a good matchup, I think. I think it'll be a fun game.
Yeah. There's a Spurs connection, as there often is in no matter who the Spurs play these days. There's former Spurs coaches, players, assistants throughout the league. But the head coach of the Memphis Grizzlies, Taylor Jenkins, was a former Austin Spurs coach, and kind of building like the Jazz, like a lot of other teams, kind of building in that Spurs model. And this could be at a level of intrigue to this one.
And one of the things that I don't want to say bodes well for the Spurs, but maybe is in their favor. The really bad matchups for the Spurs, because the Spurs you're not going to count on them to make threes. They're not going to make a whole bunch of threes. So the Spurs aren't. Right. So the really bad matchups for the Spurs are the teams that take and make a ton of threes. The Jazz, the Blazers, teams like that. Like at the end of the season, those were the teams that were just annihilating your local Cagers. The Memphis Grizzlies are not a volume three-point shooting team. They're down in the bottom half of the league in terms of three-pointers made per game. So that, in a way, that might keep the playing field a little more level than it might otherwise be if you're losing the three-point line by 20 some odd points. So that's one thing that might be in the Spurs favor. It might work in their favor a little bit.
On the other side of the coin, where did review those two blowouts in San Antonio? Where did the Grizzlies hurt the Spurs in those two games?
I was told there'd be no research involved in this. I don't know. I mean, it was just such an annihilation. Probably the Grizzlies did get hot from the three-point line in those games, but a lot of it just comes down to Ja Morant being just an individual talent that makes everything else on that team go. He gets even when he's not scoring 44 points. The Spurs beat the Grizzlies in the game. The Spurs actually were able to beat the Grizzlies. They gave up a career high 44 to Ja. So even when he's not scoring 44, though, he's getting into the paint. He's just creating all kinds of havoc for your defense and getting open shots for other people. So it's not a hot take to say he's the head of the snake, and anything that the Grizzlies get done well, it's due to him. Also, I think in both those games, the common thread was the Grizzlies defended really well. The Spurs, I don't believe, got over 100 in either of those games, or if they did, it was just barely over into triple digits. And in the NBA in these days, it's really hard to win in the high 90s, low hundreds. You've got to get well over 100 to really give yourself a shot. So
I remember back in college, like when you'd have when the professor would ask you a question, high school, whatever, and you didn't know the answer to it. If you just talked for a long time, sometimes you could fake your way through it. And I feel like that's what Jeff just did. And not to embarrass the polarizing Jeff McDonald, but both games that these Spurs lost the Grizzlies in San Antonio, the Spurs scored more than 100 points.
Okay.
So he got that part wrong, but he sounded like he knew what he was talking about.
Let's go back and erase that part.
The other tried and true way to distract is to turn the question to the teacher. I always like that.
Yeah, exactly.
We used to do that in our Spanish class at Lee High School. We would ask our teacher was an ex-football coach, And you could get him off track so easily by asking him something about his days as a football coach at South Sam. And once he took his glasses off, you knew the rest of the class was over and he was going to reminisce for the rest of the day. So we can always turn a question to you, Mike Finger.
Well, Jeff should have done that, because right now I'm going to expose, because I quickly pulled up the box scores from those two games in San Antonio. Not only did the Spurs score more than 100 in both of those games, but the Grizzlies, I guess I'll give them some credit on this. Just that they probably hit a lot of threes. They did. In both in one of the games, they shot 15 for 30. In the other, they shot 17 for 35. Pretty decent percentage on both. Pretty good volume on both. But it was not maybe this is something too, in that when the Spurs prevailed in their season opening contest, Ja Morant, as Jeff correctly pointed out, scored a career high in points. They let him go off, handled everybody else. Spurs won in Memphis. In San Antonio, Ja scored 19 and 13 in those two games. So maybe there's something to be gleaned from that, and that maybe you let Ja do his thing and try to not let him spread the wealth. Could that be something?
Well, let me go back one second. Yes, you're correct. But I just was unaware I was going to have to know like play-by-play of games from January for this thing you guys invited me to do at 10 o'clock in the morning.
You signed up. You were assigned to do your one podcast a week. And on the week, whenever the Spurs are going to play an all or nothing play-in game against an opponent that you've known for more than 48 hours now, and you didn't think that the recent history between these two franchises might come up?
Well, yeah, and that's why I told you that Memphis beat the Spurs by a combined 48 points in those two games, and that Ja Morant had a career-high 44 in the opener. I didn't know you wanted to know like how many points John Conchar scored in the series, which in those two games it was 7. Okay. It was 7, by the way. I remember that vividly. The 7 John Conchar points in the two games at the AT&T Center.
I would like to point out to the listeners that if you're looking for in-depth analysis of the local Cagers, Tom Orsborn also writes for the Express News. And so if you can go to theexpressnews.com and looking for just well-researched stuff about sports, about just what's going on in your region. Like, it's not just Jeff McDonald. Jeff McDonald, you can get the superficial, who won, who lost, what he felt about the pregame meal. Like, that's cool there too. So if you want that, you can get that expressnews.com. You also get well-researched analysis information from the rest of the fine staff that sports editor Nick Talbot has, that the entire newspaper has. And you can get it for a reasonable fee. And just don't judge everything by the polarizing Jeff McDonald.
As Davy Crockett once said, I think, I'm going back to bed and you can go to hell. I think that's how the quote went, right?
Something like that.
I didn't research that one either.
There was no back door to the Alamo. Go ahead,
interesting thing on the third box score from the third game, won by the Grizzlies 133-102. Tyus Jones, older brother of Trey Jones, Spurs rookie, 14 assists in that game.
Yeah.
But even more interesting than that.
I know what you're going to say.
Even more interesting than
that.
Scored
19 points in that game, Tom.
They had 9 players. The Grizzlies logged 9 players in double figures, including
who had 19?
A force off the bench scoring 19 points on 8 of 10 shooting.
Wait. Don't finish this. We're going to play Does Jeff Know?
Gorgie Jang. I know this. Good Lord.
Okay. Jeff wins.
But what a game by that guy. What a game. The Spurs, and he's on our side.
The Spurs better guard him well in this game. That's all I'm saying. The Spurs better guard him well. Yes. He's going to be the center of the Spurs defensive game plan.
Okay, another example of the San Antonio Spurs brain trust, Greg Popovich, Brian Wright, R.C. Buford, during the course of the season, could have made any number of trades, any number of big transactions, but they knew all along that it was all going to come down to this: a single game against Memphis in which the X factor is taking the 19 points, 8 of 10 shooting, 9 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block that Gorgui Dieng had against them in that last game. Move all of that to the Spurs side of the ledger, and the rest is just gravy.
It was just like that brilliant move of letting Brent Forbes go.
Yes. This is what we talked about last time. Plucking Brent Forbes from obscurity, building up into a free agent that the Milwaukee Bucks would want, and then just torching Forbes when he comes back for all kinds of three-pointers. They play the long game around here, man. People criticize day to day, but you got to keep the long game in mind.
But what if Taylor Jenkins has learned a thing or two and from his Spurs days, and Gorgui is a sleeper cell? Maybe he's been dispatched to blow up this series for the Spurs. Ever think about that?
The counter to that. And have you ever seen like a really good spy movie? Like there's no way Jeff has seen this, but I bet Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, like that's
you just making
where there's
all
kinds of like double.
You're just making
double agents.
It's not a real movie.
You never know who's on whose side. Okay, so Jenkins has dispatched Gorgui Dieng. Jenkins has dispatched Gorgui Dieng to the Spurs, but you know who plays for the Memphis Grizzlies? Kyle Anderson. How about that? So whose side is he really on?
Well, but Kyle Anderson is playing well,
right? But will he play well in this game?
What's this movie you just said that you just made up out of thin air? That's completely made up.
It's a very popular, but Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's great. I highly recommend it.
So give me like 2 sentences.
It's about spy stuff in Great Britain, in the UK. And you never know who's on whose side. Great actors.
Colin Firth.
Are you sure? Yeah. Are you sure you're not talking about Spy Kids?
That was directed by University of Texas alumnus Robert Rodriguez, who also did Desperado and all kinds of good stuff like that. But yeah, that's a good one too. I'm not sure that applies to this one, but you know.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy also has one, Gary Oldman.
Yes, Oldman.
Yes. Who played one Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right.
In the movie JFK.
Uh-huh.
And of course, Lee Harvey Oswald had a part in Spurs history, but that's for another podcast.
That's for another podcast. Yeah. We don't need to get into that today. There's another, like, I know we're completely down a weird, stupid tangent here, but who's that? Do you have the page up for that, Tom? Is it Ciaran Hinds? Is that how you say that guy's name? He's a great actor too. I think he was in Rome. Something like that.
No, not seeing him.
No. Okay. Well.
Yeah, he was in the movie. I brought up the Wikipedia because I had no idea what you were talking about either. I was actually with Jeff McDonald for once on this. I had never heard of this movie.
It's a great movie. It's from about 10 years ago.
Great. I'll have to see if it's on Amazon or something or Netflix and watch it now. Just out of curiosity, interest, because I've never heard of this movie either. I thought you were just making words up as well.
And it's called.
I would never do such a thing.
It's called Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, or something like that.
Right.
It's what I thought he was saying here too. But I thought we're way off the tangent now. I don't even know what we were talking about. Kyle Anderson, I think.
Kyle Anderson is a former Spur who is playing a decent role, and I think to get it back to this game itself. One interesting thing about this play-in game, as opposed to the one that I guess will follow it on national TV, whenever you're hyping Warriors versus Lakers, which is that 7 versus 8 game, it's LeBron James versus Steph Curry. With the Spurs and the Grizzlies, like you can pick any number of 8 guys, 9 guys who might play the starring role in this. It could be a Kyle Anderson. It wouldn't be the most outlandish thing in the world to see Gorgui Dieng come off the bench and play a huge role for the Spurs in this one. I doubt it, but there's nobody like DeMar. I guess it's DeMar DeRozan against Ja Morant is the shorthanded way to look at it. But there's a lot of guys who could end up playing a big role in this. And I am interested in how this one game thing develops over the next couple of days. There's the Eastern Conference on Tuesday night, Western Conference on Wednesday night. We've never really seen this one game playoff type of thing in the NBA before. And I think it's going to be really cool to watch, if I can be kind of upbeat and positive and genuine right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Like some of the players have compared it to a Game 7, and it's kind of obvious why that comparison would be there. It's win or you're out. But I don't think that's exactly accurate, because when you get to a Game 7 in a series, you've had 6 games to figure out what's worked and what doesn't work, and kind of feel each other out.
The math checks out on that.
And when it's one and done, you don't have that. It's what it is. It's a Game 1 for all the marbles. And a lot of times when you look at these 7-game series, the underdog wins Game 1. Even occasionally in the 1-8 game in the playoffs, every so often the underdog will go on the road and win the first game. But over the course of 7 games, the best team figures it out and wins the series. If the underdog goes on the road and wins the first game on Wednesday, it's the Spurs move on and the Grizzlies are out. So that's kind of like you say, it is an interesting sort of scenario that we haven't quite seen before in the NBA.
At the risk of assuming that Jeff McDonald did any kind of preparation or is
fully awake,
has any basic knowledge on this, fully awake. Weren't there multiple Spurs championship runs that began with a loss in the first game of the playoffs?
It sort of feels like all of them, but I know it wasn't. But It sort of feels like all of them.
Yeah. But you're right that dimension. I mean, this one you have to be ready right away, and there's no between games adjustments. There's no feeling out period. Think of how many games just during the course of a season, regular season games, where one team or the other just looks out of it in the first quarter and never gets it back. Like that, you don't have that luxury in this game. I think it's gonna be riveting. How about that?
I still hate it. On Sunday, we had 2 of these games already. Then they would have meant more if we didn't have this playing game. We would have had, the Wizards play the Hornets. If the winner the loser would have went home there. And then we also had the Warriors versus the Grizzlies. We already saw 2 of these scenarios play out, and they just didn't mean as much. So now we get to run it back.
But you add extra ones. Those games will like the Warriors Grizzlies game was great on Sunday. So you get that because there are stakes in that game. The winner gets into the winner side of the bracket. The loser has to go to loser or lose all. And now we get more of them throughout the week. I'm pro play-in. Also, and I brought up this before on this podcast, I just think it makes the tanking question more irrelevant than it already is, because there's no way that in the Spurs situation they should have even considered trying to lose games on purpose at the end, even though they did go 2-8 to finish 2-10 to finish the season, because the worst thing that happens, you get into this play-in game and you lose when you're still in the lottery. I think it's a great way to avoid teams making that decision to not make the 8th seed, which I think is probably the worst situation the NBA could find itself in when a team doesn't want to make the playoffs. It just lessens that incentive. I think that's a good thing.
I will give you that point, that it probably does limit tanking a little bit. So maybe that is a good thing, because there were way too many teams that were tanking just if you not because they didn't think they were going to make the 8th seed, or they didn't want to make the 8th seed. So it probably does limit that. I'm just anti-tanking or anti-playing, because we already had 2 of these games. I think, sorry Spurs fans to say this, but I think the best 8 teams in every league are with 1 through 8, and I think they proved it through the course of 72 games, and especially they proved it with the Warriors beating the Grizzlies and the Wizards beating the Hornets on Sunday.
I would agree with that. But But I think more drama is good, and you even had the drama of the six teams trying to get into sixth, which never would happen otherwise. That was good. I mentioned that the Spurs finished.
That did add some drama.
I need to ask Tom because I know that he is prepared. What was the Spurs record after Derek White was out for the season? They finished 2-10.
2-10. 2-10. Final 12 games. Yes.
Coincidence, or is that cause and effect, or a combination of both? Was Derek White that important to this team?
Well, they probably, I mean, down the stretch, they lose the Final Four. So the last two games probably would have went the same way. Brooklyn and New York with Derek. Maybe they win the New York game. Just
in general, rather than game by game, how important do you think that Derek White was to this team?
Very important. I mean, you take away your top perimeter defender and you're a volume 3-point shooter. It's very important. Although, they're still 500. Just with the whole season with his injuries, see if Jeff agrees with me. If he's in there, they'd finish 500 probably, or a little bit better.
You had the breakdown on that too, Tom, didn't you? With their total record, they were 500 with him and
18-18 with him, 15-21 without.
They were 500 with him, but I don't think there was ever a stretch where there was maybe one stretch where he was healthy and in rhythm for a bunch of games in a row. So a lot of those 18-18 when he did play, he wasn't really right yet, and he wasn't playing. Sometimes he's on a minutes restriction. Sometimes he's just coming off a layoff. I do. Does he make a 7? What did they finish 33 and 39? Does he make a 7-game difference in the final standings? I don't know, but I do know just in general, like Tom said, he's very important to what the Spurs do. And it's just a matter of having a lot of good players. Like I had it was a while back, a couple years ago, that basically it was when Steve Clifford was in Charlotte. I remember talking to him before a game, and he distilled. I mean, it seems obvious, but he kind of distilled how to win an NBA game to the barest terms, and it's that you need 7 or 8 guys to play well. And if you have one of your guys out or 2 of your guys out that are in that pool of guys who you expect to play well, it just lessens your ability to find those 7 or 8 guys to play well. And the Spurs, they don't have outside of DeMar, they don't have an all-star. They don't. That's a fair thing to say. They don't have an all-star. So they're going to have to do it with more, being more than the sum of their parts. And when you take some of those parts away, it just makes it harder for them to figure out a way to win. And so you lose Derek for all the games he missed, and especially down the stretch. I mean, it's obviously going to have an effect.
What was bigger, Derek being out or the COVID outbreak that just screwed up the whole second half of the season?
Well, I don't know. They're both pretty bad. And the COVID outbreak, I mean, obviously,
since Derek
included Derek in that as well. I mean, you knew, like the way that guy was snake bit this year, you knew if there was going to be a COVID outbreak, he was going to be involved in it. He just had a snake bit season. But the COVID thing, that had a lot of domino effect to it. That it stopped the season right at the time when they were playing well. I mean, they'd started the rodeo trip 2-0 and were really feeling good about themselves, and then they couldn't play for 10 days. When they came back, they had to play shorthanded because some of those guys were still in protocol. So they come back and lose a game to Oklahoma City, which that would be a game you would normally think they would win. And then it postponed 5 games to the second half of the season, which created that scenario where they were playing every day or every other day and couldn't get any rest. And, all that together really, really sidetracked the Spurs season. I think if you take COVID break out, if just by some miracle they just played the schedule as it stood, I think there's a good chance they get to 500.
And could still be in the same situation, either as a 9 or a 10 or an 8 seed, probably. We typically don't do prognostications, picks to click on the Spurs Insider podcast because it would just make us look dumber than we already are. But since this is a one-game situation, just want to go around the virtual room. Who is your pick if the local Cagers prevail on Wednesday in Memphis? Who is the key player? Maybe not the high scorer, but the key player that had a big game that lifted the Spurs over the top. In other words, who do the Spurs need that boost from? We will start with the boss, Nick Talbot.
The boss.
I'll go with someone the more obvious choice. I'm going to go with DeJounte Murray. I just think they'll need his defense more than anything, especially, you said in those 2 games where they lost, they gave up a lot of 3-pointers. I think protecting out there is going to be important. And I think it's going to be DeJounte making some steals on defense and getting this team moving. I don't know if he'll be the high scorer, but I think he'll be the most crucial person in shutting the Grizzlies down and possibly moving on to then face the Lakers or the Warriors, which will be a completely different battle.
Tom Ringo Osborne, your pick to click.
I think it'd be neat to see DeMar DeRozan come through at the end.
Yeah.
I think, when we talk about no pressure being on the Spurs, I disagree. I think there's a lot of pressure on him, wanting to get in the playoffs, and I think he's going to come through.
The polarizing Jeff McDonald, your pick to click.
Well, I would be like to be
taking Jakob, isn't he?
I'd like to be on the record to say that the boss actually stole mine, so I'll have to pick something else. But
okay,
just when DeJounte plays well, they tend to play well. But
who off the bench could give a boost?
I was going to go with the bench. I was going to go with a bench player just to as my second choice. I'm going to say Patty Mills. Because, this is kind of a game when it's a one and done. You see this in the NCAA tournament a lot. You have a team that comes out and hits a bunch of threes, and all of a sudden that just turns the game on its ear. So if Patty Mills has he's had 1 or 2 in the last couple of months. But if he can summon one of those 5 3-pointer games, 4, 5, 6 3-pointers, that tends to become contagious. The Spurs tend to hit a lot, and if Spurs hit a bunch of 3-pointers in this game, they're gonna win it. It's not their profile this year, but if they hit a lot of 3-pointers in this game, they're going to win it. And Patty Mills would be the ringleader of that if he could just summon some of that FIBA Patty magic.
For those of you who've done your research, do the Spurs have anybody on their roster or on their bench who may have spent a lot of time in Memphis and would love to have a big 1-game performance in that gym? Does any
2 of them?
2 of them?
Yeah.
I was thinking more of Rudy Gay. That would be cool.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. But we'll see. The point is there could be any number of guys who could play a big role. And Memphis has the same situation. We're over our 30-minute mark already. We'll go a little bit longer because there was another minor story over the weekend. A former Spurs assistant got enshrined in the Hall of Fame. We'll finish with these. Anybody's impressions, favorite moments of the Tim Duncan ceremony in Connecticut over the weekend? Jeff?
You throwing it to me?
Yeah. Did you watch?
Yes, I watched, you jackass. Yeah, I missed being there. I thought that would have been fun to. That would actually have been a fun thing to cover in person. But yeah, it was very it was exactly what you'd expect it to be. I mean, Tim, for all the nervousness he admitted to at the beginning of his speech, he was always a good interview when he would submit to it. When he's had to talk in front of the entire AT&T Center, both at his jersey retirements and at Tony and Manu's, he's been a highlight. He's got a good sense of humor, and I think that was on display a couple times in his Hall of Fame speech. So the whole night was a good night. I think San Antonio fans could be proud of it. I think it probably sparked a lot of nostalgia. The montage they showed of young Tim running and dunking and taking people off the dribble, and I think that probably warmed the hearts of San Antonians everywhere. So all in all, it was a good good experience. I think at the end, as we all knew, Kobe's enshrinement was going to cast a pall, but I thought all the speeches were really great. And it was a good night all around.
I thought Patty Mills had a great review, authentic, genuine, no BS, and I would throw in efficient in 12 minutes. And I enjoyed Rudy Tomjanovich throwing out cojones.
Yeah, that might have been the highlight.
And just a quick plug for the Express News. The coverage by my colleagues Jeff and Mike were outstanding. Great columns by Mike, and then a great look back at Tim's formative years in the Virgin Islands, and by Jeff was outstanding.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
It wasn't necessarily the funniest line of the night or the most emotional, but the one that I got the biggest kick out of was when Timmy shouted out our friend Tom James for always being in the line of fire because I hate talking to people. If nothing else, he was honest.
He was honest. We might be out of time.
Yeah.
One thing I was thinking of, I don't know, during that thing and just after, if 22-year-old Tim Duncan dropped into the NBA today, what would that look like? Like, how would he? Obviously, he would still be a dominant player, and maybe the most dominant player. Well, how would his game look different if he was 22 years old and dropped into this, pace and space 3-point shooting league?
Like, it's a good question, and I'm sort of glad that he didn't. That we got him when we did.
Yeah.
Because he would have to be and by we I mean basketball watchers. Yeah. As a collective, not just San Antonio, but just in general, the fact that we got to watch that guy in his era, I think was way better than if he would be in the game today. Because the game today, even though it's more efficient, there's more analytics that goes into it. The players are playing smarter than they ever have. Like, you'd have Timmy out there shooting threes, and he could have done it.
He would have grown up playing. He would have grown up playing that way, probably. And grown up handling the ball more, probably. I kind of think maybe it looks like what Joel Embiid is doing now, where he still can play with his back to the basket and have those moves, but you also have to respect his 3-point game. But I do agree with you. I'm glad we got the version of Tim Duncan in the era that he was assigned, so to speak.
That whole mid-range game would have been discouraged by whichever team drafted him. When Pop was asked a week or two ago about Tim's bank shot and whether we'll ever see somebody like that again, he basically said no, because it would have to be a 3-point shooter.
Nobody's going to bank in 3-pointers.
Nobody's going to bank in 3-pointers other than Steph, he said. So I think that's an interesting question, and my answer to it is the one I get. I think he'd be a different player. He'd certainly still be a winner, the same type of leader. But I think, to close on the positive note that we always like to close on, be thankful for what we got when we got it. And I think we all can do that, not just about Tim Duncan, but all of the wondrous blessings in our lives. Even I can't keep a straight face as I finish this. There was a review that Jeff sent me.
Do you have it?
Off the whatever. Where did you get? I don't. I might be able to find it here. Where Jeff says that I've completely duped the populace. Yeah. I can't find it, but it has something to do.
I can read it for you. I've got it. You want me to read it?
Go ahead.
All right. This is a review it's just some letters and numbers, but it's a 5-star review. Of
our podcast.
About our podcast. He titles his review "Important for Personal Development." He or she, I don't know. Okay, so here's a review. Complete transparency here. I'm a Jeff. This podcast has provided me with an unflattering but important mirror for myself as I make strides towards becoming a Mike Finger. Bless you all, even the Jeff. And my response to that is, God, you've got these rubes snowed. was my text about.
Well, even if I'm playing a role, it's a role that can be a role model for people. So again, be thankful for what you've received when you've received it. We received Tim Duncan at the perfect time to receive Tim Duncan as a basketball community, as just a citizen of the world. And there are things that you can be thankful for, including this fine podcast. And until we meet you again, I encourage you to take care of each other and to keep it real.
By the way, be thankful for what you get when you get it is my approach to this podcast. So